a tent in the back of Shomrei. I think there's going to be a tent in the back of KMS. So it's definitely a work in process.
This is all tentative.
All
All
tentative.
tentative.
With a capital T.
Oh,
Yeah. But the service will be intense. So,
Wow.
So far, so
Wow.
all right. So, first of all, we are now being recorded, and I would like to take this opportunity to thank David Jure for his sponsorship of today's Shiur, and he is sponsoring for a refuah shalema to Rabbi Hyatt in honor of Rabbi Grauman and all who attend this Shiur. And now I will turn it over to Jay Parnas, who will take it from here.
Good morning, everybody. We have a number of mazel tovs. Jack Kalman on the 60th anniversary of his bar mitzvah.
Mazel tov.
Esther Edison on the marriage of her grandson. Mazel tov. Masha and Seth Katz on the marriage of their son.
Mazel
tov.
Mazel tov.
Together with the Meislers, another local combination that was created. Melissa and Chad Miller on the bar mitzvah of their son yesterday in Rabbi Pepper's shul. And
Shul, nice.
Oh, it's a deck.
I know. I'm just yanking your chain.
But he actually put a covering over the whole deck. So
very nice.
And also to Hetty Preiser on the forthcoming marriage of her granddaughter. Those any other mazel tovs? No. Okay. Category 2, refuah shlema.
Harav David Meir ben Chaya Sipa.
David Meir ben Chaya Sipa.
Nathanael Lon ben Shana Tzipora.
Nathanael Lon ben Shana Tzipora.
Mordechai ben Shana.
Mordechai ben Shana.
Meir Leib ben Leah.
Meir Leib ben Leah.
Zev ben Leah.
Zev ben Leah.
Chaya Riva bas Yehudas Devora.
Chaya Riva bas Yehudas Devora.
Udal bat Rachel.
Udal bas Rachel.
Maryosha Meta bat Risha Miriam.
Maryosha Meta bat Risha Miriam.
Like Begaliba bas Abraham Alevi.
Her mother.
Oh no, this is for Shalema or?
For Shalema.
Ida.
Say again.
Lega Bas Ada. And Sipor Rizal Bas Ada.
Sipor Rizal Bas Ada. Rabbi Fall Yisrael Yaakov ben Bela, Avram ben Gittel, Hannah bas Devora, Shana Tova bas Esther.
Okay, I want to go back a second to the mazel tovs because the Shabbos shorts this week was a combination of a number of families. Mazel tov to Melania and Sandy Carlin on their 35th wedding anniversary.
Mazel tov.
And also Bobby and Jules Meisler to honor Esther Edison for her 36 years of work and dedication to our shul. And also in the Yortsides, which come up now, Florence and Larry Rudkowski to commemorate the Yortsides of their fathers. And their names are in the Shabbos shorts. And other Yortsides today? Okay. I think I'm finished for.
Okay.
I get the week off. Okay.
Very good. Very good. Okay, shkoyach everybody. And we're on Testament Bays. We've reached a new milestone. We're starting a new Mishnah. Slightly different topic, but also still we are addressing the overall question of Metzias. And this Mishnah on Testament Bays poses some other interesting questions. Does the Mishnah, if a person was riding on an animal, so here the issue no longer is the kinyan of the animal, but v'roa es ha-metzia. He's riding the animal, and on the ground, he sees a metzia. He sees something lying there, shiny object. It looks very nice. And someone is walking by. V'amar l'chavero tenoli. Give this to me. Notla. So the friend who's on the ground picks it up. V'omar ani zechisi bo. and he says, I am Zeiche to it. Zachaba. So what happens is that the rider sees the object, he calls attention to the pedestrian, the person who is walking, and he says to him, you see that object? Why don't you pass it to me? The fellow picks it up, takes a look at it, and says, Ani zechisi ba. I am Zeiche to it. Says the Mishnah Zachaba, that he is Zeiche. Now, this will be much discussed in the Gemara and from every angle, but it seems that what happened here is that, and we really are unclear at the time that the chaver, the one on the ground, saw it, what did he really think? But in plain Mishnah language, he picked it up. Because the Mishnah tells us, this is important, the Mishnah tells us, notla. So notla would mean that he picked it up and made a hagbah. He lifted it, which is a kinyan hagbah, which we know is a valid kinyan. So now, and then he says, Ani zechisi ba. Notla, v'amani zechisi ba. He doesn't say Ani zechisi ba and then pick it up. He picks it up and then says Ani zechisi ba. Says the Mishnah Zachaba. Okay, we're going to have to.
There are a lot of there are pronouns being tossed around here. So the I.
The I means the person who is on the ground.
On the ground, not the rochev.
No, the rochev is on the horse. He doesn't do anything other than say, "Give it to me."
So the other question is that this object has to be totally free, hefker, no possible.
Yes, obviously hefker. Obviously, totally hefker. Correct.
Nobody.
You drive around it. You're on a horse. You see an object on the ground, a shiny object. Looks really nice. Could be a diamond. It could be a piece of gold. It could be a piece of silver. Anything.
You normally have to make an announcement through Bezdin that this was found before anybody can take it.
Well, not if it's in a Rishus Rabbin. Under certain circumstances, yes, you would have to go to the Bezdin or to the Rav or whoever, where there potentially could be simonim, in a chotzer or maybe in a mavoi or somewhere. But in Rishus Rabbin, clearly, it's there's no immediate way of announcing or saying who this belongs to. So we're going to assume that that's what it was. It was Rishus Rabbin, and first come, first serve. If he sees it, he wants to grab it, he wants to take it. Tefker. All right. So he sees it. The other pronoun is so the person on the ground who maybe he didn't know of it. He was called to his attention by the fellow on the horse. And he looks at it and he picks it up. And then he says, Ani zechisi ba. No, I'm keeping it for myself. Zacha. Okay. So we already see that there are certain questions that come up just as a result of this fact pattern, because there are some ambiguities. So let's hold off because the Gemara is going to discuss it. Now, that's the Reisha of the Mishnah. The Seifa of the Mishnah, he picks it up and he gives it to the rider. Im mishenasnalo, he gave it to the rider. Omar, now he pipes up and says, Ani zechisi bo tchila, I am zeiche to it first. Loi omar klum. What's the sequence? The rider sees it, says to his friend on the ground, see that object, why don't you hand that to me? The guy looks at it on the ground, picks it up, gives it to the rider, and after he gives it to the rider, he says, oh, by the way, I'm zeiche to this. But he does it after he gives it to him. Loi amar klum. Again, that gives rise to certain questions. So Rashi here, lo amar klum, on the second half of the Mishnah says as follows. The afilo omrinan, even if you say, Hamagbia Metzia lechavero, lo kona chavero, that someone gives a Metzia, a found object, to his friend. The friend, meaning the rider here. Lo kona, kiven diyovle, kania. Why? Because since he gave it to the fellow, the rider, he's konen. In other words, even if you say Hamagbia Metzia lechavero lo kona chavero, So it's already giving rise to the point that you cannot be zeicha for somebody else. Very important concept, right? I find something, I pick something up. I can't be zeicha for somebody else. We've had this discussion, by the way, numerous times in our Gemara and Bava Metzia over the weeks. Is can I pick up something and be zeicha for my friend? I want to pick it up for Reuven. I don't want it. I see this. Oh, this is perfect for Reuven. I want to pick it up for Reuven. So that's discussion we've had, whether Zachala Adam Shalom B'fanav, because you can be Zeicha for someone not in front of him. So he says, even if you hold that you cannot be Zeicha for somebody, Kivan Diyovle Kenuya, Mamonov Shach. Since he gave it to the rider is Kona Mamonov Shach from two different ways. Ikeniya Kama. If he's kind of right away, the lo miskaven lahaknus lechavero, or yohav nela b'matana. If you want to say that the first guy was kind of because he never intended to give it to be kind of for his friend, okay, I accept that. He was kind of, and what did he do? He gave it to his friend b'matana. In other words, Reuven is the rider, Shimon is on the ground. If you say that Shimon never intended to be kind of for Reuven the rider, okay, I accept that. But he gave it to him. He was Kona himself. Shimon was Kona. And then what did he do? He gave Reuven a matana. He gave him a gift. There was no exchange of word, oh, by the way, this is mine. He gave him the gift. Later on, he wakes up and says it's mine, but he already gave him the gift. The Eloikania Kama. And if Shimon, the guy on the ground, was not Kona, because he didn't have the kavana to be Kona, Hefker, then it remains Hefker adamotam yodei until he gives it to the rider's hands. It's Hefker. And the rider is Kona because he took it from the hand of the guy on the ground. L'shem kiniyui. So the Rashi is telling us as follows: that in the second half of in the sefer of this Mishnah, if a person picks it up and says nothing and just hands it over because the guy asked him to, and then he says, "Oh, by the way, I was kind of this already because I made a hagbah," loy omaklum. And Rashi is telling us loy omaklum, A, because he never said the Farish, "I am Koneh." And B, no matter how you look at it, you can argue that the rider should be Kona. Either the fellow on the ground was Kona and he gave him a matana, or he was not Kona and it was Hefker, and who made the first Kinyan? The rider. He gave it to him in his hand, he picked it up, and he says it's mine. So,
Rabbi?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. So looking at Rashi, where we say that, where Rashi says, okay, he picked it up, he was Kona, but then he made a gift to Reuven, to the rider. So, but doesn't there have to be some verbalization of that gift? In other words, he picks it up and he's Kona it. Now he hands it to Reuven. Without saying anything at all, we don't know whether it's a gift or a loan or whether he picked it up for Reuven's intention. But then he says the words, however, understand I acquired it for myself and I'm lending it to, I acquired it for myself. So without any verbalization, why do we assume that he acquired himself and then he's making a gift? Why do we assume it's a gift or a loan? Why do we assume it's a gift without any words passing between Reuven and Shimon? I guess that's my question.
So that's a good question. So now let's take a step back. Let's understand what did he do when he picked it up, because we have to look at that act first. Now, if you're going to say that a person, this is important, if you're going to say that a person cannot pick something up and acquire it for his friend, you can't. Remember, that's a machlokes. So let's say he could never have done that. The only thing that could have happened without a word being said is that he picked it up, it's automatically his. No word has to be said. The halacha is you pick it up, it's yours because you can't be kind of for the other guy. So now that it's yours silently, right? No talkie, silently, it's his. Now, what did he do? He handed it to the other fellow. Arguably, again, no words. We're just following the pattern of what happened. He's already kinda, because we know that he has to be kinda because the other guy can't be kinda. Now, without any further word, he turns it over and gives it to Reuven the rider. So we can surmise, since there's been no dialogue whatsoever, that halachically he picked it up for himself. Can't be anything else. And at the same time, he looked at it, everything, and he said, gave it to the fellow. Why did he give it to the fellow? He asked him.
Yes.
He asked him, do me a favor, pick this up for me.
Noli.
No, so that's why one side of the argument is that he picked it up, was kind of it, and gave it as a matana. You're right. We have no proof either way. You can argue it both ways, clearly. But if you take the position that he was kind of right away, without dibur, then you can also take the position that he then turned it over and gave it to the other fellow. Why would he not say at that point, ah, very nice, here, take a look at what I just found, it's mine. So again, we're foraging here because we don't have anything clear. So the one side says that I was kinda, and I gave it to him as a matana. The other side says I was never kinda, because I had no intention of being kinda. So when I picked it up, I picked up a Metzia that was hefker. I was not kinda, because I don't have to be kinda. And I gave it to Reuven on the horse, and he made the hagbah.
And actually, along those lines, Rabbi, it's interesting because he doesn't say, "Oh, by the way, Reuven, it is mine," and he hands it to him. He doesn't say that. He says, "I acquired it first." So it could well be that he acquired it first. As we said, he picked it up, he acquired it, and now he's giving it as a matan. In other words, the fact that he says, "Aniza chisi batchila," I acquired it first, that doesn't mean that he's not now making a gift to Reuven. It's simply verbalizing what in fact happened, which is he picked it up and he acquired it.
Correct. But the sequence is important because when does he say it? He said only
right. He says it after he hands it over.
He could easily have said it before. He could have said, "Oh, thank you. This is very nice. I'm acquiring this. You want to take a look at it? Here, take a look at it." But
But what's interesting is even if he said Aniza chisiba, he picks it. He says, "I'm picking it up for me," and he picks it up, and then he hands it to Reuven. It could be the same argument. It could be he acquired it. He says, "It's mine. I'm picking it up. I acquired it," and then he hands it to Reuven without saying anything. It's the same concept. It could be a gift.
Well, couldn't you look at it?
You don't know why he gave it to Reuven.
Or it could be, hey, look what I found.
Correct.
Well,
we don't know because he hasn't said anything.
Yeah.
You're right.
Could you look at it a different way where when he picks it up, he's handing it to him because he was asked to give it to him? That man could have dropped it. He was asking him to do it rather than getting off his horse. And he was saying, and then when he realized that he didn't take the ownership of it, if he didn't recognize it, then he said it was his, that he took the kohen.
that's an interesting point. In other words, that the writer says to Nali, and he doesn't say, "Return my item." He just says the words to Nali.
Give it to me.
If it was something valuable, wouldn't you expect him to get off the horse to pick it up for himself?
You would think, but you're right, because he saw the guy standing there, so instead of getting off the horse, but he didn't say, Tanali avoida shali. He didn't say,
"It's mine, my item."
Right.
Right.
And by the way,
Reuven was relying on his alleged friend, who, when he saw it was a valuable item, decided to pocket it himself. I think that's he needs better friends.
Right, but David, you're asking an interesting question, which I would say remind at the end of this sugya, when we get to the very end of this Gemara on Daf Yud Omen Aleph, let's ask the question again, because there the question will be more appropriate when the Gemara talks about the language that the writer used to ask his friend. Yeah. That's a good point, because the Gemara later, if you want to peek ahead, is going to say there's a different language that he could have used. And to your point, then the question arises, if he says something different, does it change the materiality of our discussion? Because clearly, if the writer said, Shimon, you see that I dropped that diamond, please pick it up for me, then there's no question of bias. He's already saying this is mine. Here, at least we have to impute that both of them knew it was Hefker. We have to impute that, at least for the discussion. We're saying that they both knew it was Hefker, and that either Shimon on the ground didn't care and said, sure, here it is, or that Shimon did care and wanted it for himself. And then the question arises, when Shimon picks it up, is it automatic that it's his because you can't be Zoicha for somebody else? Or is it not automatic because you can be Zoicha? And that's what this Gemara is now going to expound, is this discussion of what rights does Shimon have the minute he picks it up. The minute he picks it up, we all agree he made a hagbah. He made a hagbah, a technical term for a kinyan. The question is, does it matter?
Does intent matter? In other words, if you
Intent
picked it up,
definitely matters. Intent
I'm sorry?
definitely matters.
So if I'm sitting on this horse and I look down there and I say, hey, that's mine, would you get it for me? And in my mind, I'm saying that's mine. I saw it first. I'm claiming it.
But
not necessarily that it was, I just said, that's mine. Would you pick that up for me? And he has he thinks that it belongs to me, that I'm not just claiming it. So he has no intention of providing a kinyan because he believes it's mine already.
If that's the case, then you're right. Then somehow it would shift the kavana as to whose it is. But without knowing anything more, let's just assume that both knew it was a Metzia, because we're going to get into back and forth. We can push that off a little bit until we get to a different set of the Gemara. But let's assume that they both knew it was Hefker. They both knew that it was ownerless. And Reuben says to Shimon, now, the fact that I saw it first without making a kinyan doesn't help me. I could have seen it first, but it isn't, what's the term? There's a finders keepers. But I mean, in order to have finders keepers, it's not just Bere'iyah. Remember, Pi halacha, you have to make a kinyan. In the common law, I'm not sure what the halacha would be, what the law would be. If two people one saw it and the other picked it up, if you brought it to a court and it was a very valuable object, I don't know what the court would do. I have to think about that. Yale, do you have a thought? What would the court do today, common law, if I saw it and you picked it up? I'm not sure.
Yeah, the answer is I'm not sure. Knowing the court system, they probably, after you pay legal fees, they'd probably split it. But I'm not sure.
There'd be nothing left.
It's a good question.
Right.
But in terms of practicality,
yeah,
this all remains nebulous unless you can read people's minds. So I would think that when someone picks it up, that holds more weight than, or if a person who's riding the animal says, pick it up for me, that holds more weight than someone coming after the fact and saying, well, but I had this in mind, but I had that in mind. We can't know what a person had in mind. It's too nebulous.
Then it's no fun, though. You have to have layers of ambiguity. Then it's more fun.
Right. But you see, your point, Chaim, is very much the issue here, is that there are halachic concepts, one of which is you cannot be zoicha for somebody else. So the fact that somebody else saw it, okay, yeah, I saw it first.
He said, pick it up for me. And this guy did pick it up and gave it to the guy who's riding the animal. That's an act that happened. You can see it with satellite imagery if you go and check after the fact.
And that's why.
Finale, give it to me. He just said, give it to me.
Right.
Okay. Okay. All right. So you don't know who had a kinyan. Maybe, right. It's nebulous as to either of their intent.
But you see that the Mishnah does say clearly that if no word was spoken until after the entire event took place, then the event tells us what was really going on.
Because the Mishnah says in plain language that the rider saw it. So we know they both didn't see it at the same time. We know
Correct.
that this is the case that the guy at the end.
So there's two principles at work. The first principle is, can I be zeicher for you or not? Principle number one. And principle number two is, even if I am zeicher, once I give something to you and haven't verbalized anything until after I gave it to you, the Mishnah says definitively you can't go back and say, but it was mine.
So what's the question with principle number one? That perhaps the guy on the animal who says, oh, look at that, go give it to me. Perhaps that's not good enough, is what you're saying. The guy
Correct.
picks it up. Okay, all right.
Correct.
One point. Take a modern analogy. You know, somebody a few minutes ago said, "Well, why isn't the guy, if he really wants it, why doesn't he get off this horse?" But think about it. If you're driving along and you come to a stoplight and you see on the sidewalk, and you see your friend walking by, you see a $20 bill on the ground. For you to get out of, it's not that you couldn't get out of your car, but for you to get out of your car, risk that the light's going to turn green, everything else, it would be a whole big deal, where if you just hit the button to roll down the other window and say, hey buddy, can you hand that to me, is very easy. And a horse could be a similar situation.
Yeah, you see, again, if the other guy saw it on the ground too, but saw it second and knew definitively that it didn't belong to, in other words, the $20 bill didn't blow out of the driver's window and land on the ground. He said, oh, can you hand it to me? You know, again, so in other words, it's mine, I just flew out, can you help me? Clearly, he saw it maybe a split second before the other guy, and if the other guy is a good Samaritan and says, sure, I'll hand it to you, that's fine. But then, and again, we only see simple actions. We don't know what's behind it. But there's a whole halachic discussion behind it, that if in fact it didn't belong to anybody, and the guy walking on the sidewalk picked up the $20 bill, then al pi halacha, according to one shita, he was not the shaliach of the other guy, because he can't pick it up on his behalf. If it's truly hefker, you cannot pick it up on the other person's behalf. You have to be kained and then give it to a matana. You have to do that. In other words, it's a two-step process that looks like one, but really is two-step. I picked it up, I own it. Now I'm giving to you to matana because I can't pick it up for you. And remember, what is this whole principle about? So the segue is that we have this Gemara in depth, and we discussed this. And by the way, we said the Gemara would be later. This is the later. Remember that when I pick something up and it's hefker, I'm picking it up to the detriment of everybody else in the world. Because if it's truly hefker, everybody in the world has a right to it. If I'm picking it up, can I be zeicher it for someone else, thereby taking it away from everybody else? Because that's really what's happening here. I see it, you see it, other people may not have seen it yet, or they may see it a split second later. If I'm picking it up for me, fine. But if I'm picking it up for you, I've now denied you, Menashe, the opportunity to pick it up. Can I do that? There's clearly halachic opinion that a person cannot do something for one person to the detriment of somebody else. You can do something to somebody else. You can do something for me to the I can do something for me to the detriment of you, but I can't do it to the detriment of Scott for the benefit of you. That's a halachic view. So that enters into the picture here, because if I'm picking it up for you and Scott can no longer get it, I've denied Scott the opportunity of getting it. And that position is absolutely a clear position. You can't do that. That's what makes it, again, we don't have this in the world at large, but al pi halacha, these are all concepts. So now there's a clash of concepts, and what takes precedent? My taking it, clearly number one. What's number two? Is it doing it for you directly on your behalf? Wait a minute, but then the other guy doesn't get it. Okay, I get it. So But I can do it for you because I could do it for myself. And that's where, like Migo, I can do it for you because I can do it for myself. And that's what happened, by the way, in Shnai Mochsin. In Shnai Mochsin, the way we concluded, the reason why they split it is because one person can take it for himself, but also have kavanah to do it for somebody else. So if I do it for me and for you, then we split it. So that's a concept that works. But it only works because I had kavanah to do it for you, and you had kavanah to do it for me. So now it's not Shnai Mochsin. It's one person picking it up, and he's picking it up. If it's for himself, no problem. Is it for somebody? Is it only for? If it's for himself, no problem. Is it for somebody else? Well, now we have a problem, because it's no longer for me. It's only for someone else, and if it's only for someone else, then the question is, can I be zeiche to the exclusion of the rest of the world? So that's the segue to now discussing our Gemara, because now you see how complicated this simple act of a Metzia in the street is as to whether or not someone can pick it up for somebody else. He can pick it up for somebody else and give it to him. And the Mishnah says that if you didn't give it to him, you say Zacha, it's Zacha. If you gave it to him and said it's mine first, no. So now the Mishnah has made its statement, and now we're going to see as we go into the Gemara that where the complications are. Okay, so let's go into the Gemara now. And we start the Gemara by talking about a Mishnah in Peah. What's the halacha of Peah? The halacha of Peah is that if a person has a field and during the harvest season, he has to leave the corner of the field open so that the poor of the community, of the city, will have an opportunity of taking it. Like we know the story of Boaz. So Boaz, when he reaped the field, he left the corner for the poor people. So now, just to understand where we're going to go with this, the question becomes: can you, the owner, designate that payah for a particular person? If Boaz knew Rus was looking, could he say, this is Rus's property? Or you can't legislate payah. Payah has to be open to all of the poor. And now you see the definition of the problem is because if Boaz would say, this is for Rus, then he would now vitiate the opportunity for every other poor person to get that payah. So he's now designating one poor person to the exclusion of all the other poor people.
Okay.
Are you allowed to do it? That's yeah.
Okay, so I understand that. That's good. Now, what's the other question is, who defines who's a poor person? Because if you're defining a poor person, then you're automatically excluding other people who would have had the right to that part of the land as well, right?
That's correct. Right.
So who defines it?
So, okay. So from a practical standpoint, if I own the ground, I don't have to check credentials at the door and ask, are you a poor person? Do you, like the IRS, do you have less than $10,000? You don't pay taxes. I don't have to ask that. I'm going to assume that someone who's not a poor person would not be coming for the payah. So in other words, this discussion of how do you define an ani, that's a different question. We have to analyze that question, and the Gemara in other places may say who's an ani. A person doesn't have 3 meals going forward. In other words, there is a loose definition of what is an ani. A person who doesn't have enough food for the day that he's in, but he has enough for today, but not tomorrow. These are all separate questions. So we're not worried about that. But you'll see where your question becomes material in a minute when you ask that question, because of what the Mishnah is about to tell us. So the Mishnah tells us, Tanan, Hasam, Mishelikid es payah. If a person collects payah, v'oma harezul ploni, and this payah I'm designating it for ploni, Rus in this case, we gamble, ploni ani, Rabbi Lezer omer zochelo. Rabbi Lezer says that ani is zocher. V'chachamim omrim No, yitnena la'oni hanimtza rishon. You can't do it. The first oni that knocks at the door, you have to give it to him. So I'm the owner of the field. I'd like that particular oni to have it because I feel badly. I know him. I know he's very destitute. He has 10 children. He has no food. I want to give it to him. So okay, I'm going to stand guard at my corner of my field. I'm not going to let anybody in. Okay, so Rabbi Lezer says you can do that. The Chachamim say no. If Shimon came before Rus and said, I really need this corner, then the Chachamim say you have to give it to him.
And the Chachamim's shita, similar to here, is that you can't deprive everyone else in the world who has an equal right.
Exactly the point. That's where we're going to be having this whole discussion as to whether or not the Mishnah in Peah is a raya to us. So that will evolve into the discussion. But that Mishnah in Peah has that machlokes. But wait a minute. Lest you think it's that simple, it's not that simple. Because now we're going to have to understand what the machlokes in Peah really is. So let's look at Rashi.
Rabbi?
Yeah.
Why shouldn't the owner be required to give to the poor person that he's designated out of his regular stuff? He has a whole field.
No. Out of the goodness of his heart, he can do whatever he wants with the whole field. But let's say he's got a lot of mouths to feed, and his field is kind of taken. It's spoken for. No, you're 100% right, Jay. Beyond this situation, there's no bounds to what he can do for tzedakah. But if a person really has a small field and he's got a lot of mouths to feed, and there's a mitzvah that you have to, besides leket shikha, you got to leave peah. You got to leave that corner open. So he says, you know what? I must leave the corner open, but I'd like someone that I know who has difficulty to have that. So, and unfortunately, I can't give him from the rest of mine because mine is all spoken for.
Okay.
So under that circumstance, the question is, can you designate the peah the way you would designate your own produce? So my own produce I can give by designation. Can I do it to peah? Okay, take a look at Rashi, because we're going to learn this Rashi. And then we're going to I'm going to tell you in advance, we're going to come back to it and we're going to find a problem with Rashi. But let's learn the Rashi. Now, nothing is really straightforward here. Mishalokit es peah. Odom ba'alma. She'ena ba'al sadeh. In other words, you can give peah to Odom ba'alma, who's not the owner of the field. The I ba'al sadeh, lo omar, Rabbi Loza Zocha, the Lekela Meimar Migo de Zocha Nafshe. So listen, this is very interesting. The question here is, if a person has a field and he's himself fairly destitute, he's destitute, can he designate himself as the ani? I'm destitute, I'm the ani. Says the Mishnah, it has to be Odom Ba'alma, a general person, She'ein Baal Sadeh, who is not the owner of the field, who can take it. The I Baal Sadeh, Lo Om Rabbi Lezer Zocha. Rabbi Lezer does not say that you can designate yourself. The Lekela Meimer Migo de Zocha L'Nafshei. Because the only reason why you can designate, listen to this gets even closer to home. The only reason why you can say designate is the Zocha L'Nafshei, because if he took it for himself, he would be able to use it. Therefore, Zocha L'Chavre, he can give it to his Chavre. The Afilahu Oni, even if the owner of the field is still an Oni by Scott, whatever classification you make, he is an Oni. Muzahu, he is warned, Shlo l'lakit peah misodeh shalo. He should not take peah from his own field. The Gemara says in Chulin, and also in Gittin, lo salakit la'oni, that you should not be malakit, gather from an oni, lahazir oni al shalo. When it says the words lo salakit la'oni, it's a warning that the oni cannot be the person who is the owner of the field. So let's analyze. A person who owns a field cannot be an ani for himself. He can go to the neighboring property and take payah from his friend. That he can do, sure, because he classifies himself as an ani. But if he wants to classify himself as an ani and say, I'm going to take from my own field because I'm an ani, that we didn't allow.
Well,
Okay,
it's
so
like
that's the
anything
law.
else. You're no geya bedavar. A person can't be kind of the mitzvah of bikkur cholim by visiting himself.
So that's the principle. The principle is lo salake mishalo, that a person cannot sort of double dip. He can't say, I have a field and I'm going to take from 9/10 of the field, and from that 1/10 I'm also going to take because I'm an ani. That's exactly what this is saying.
To give a current, we're not farmers analogy, but I think it's very real, which is that an ani could be going to the, to the Gabbai Tzedakah or whatever to ask for money to help, and at the same time he might then go to a minion and put a quarter in the pushka because he himself has an obligation to give tzedakah.
Right. No. But Menashe, you can do it to the same pushka. I mean, if a
right, just not at the same time. He wouldn't give and take at the same.
No, he wouldn't give and take, but he would give tzedakah,
right.
And then at the end of davening, he'd come over to the gabbai and says, by the way, I'm in need. Can you give me $1 or whatever? So that's not a stira. That's not a stira.
No.
But here clearly, now I'm going to say this, and it's going to be definitive, but I'm going to tell you in advance that there's a machlokes other Rishonim and Rashi on this. I don't want to get ahead of it because we have to learn another concept to understand the problem. But just understand that Rashi's position is not universally accepted. And it's not universally accepted for a reason that's going to be very intriguing. Because after all, you shouldn't take of your own. That's the whole point of payah, of tzedakah, is not to double dip. So why should you take? Okay, let's hold the question, but it is a question. Okay, so now, so there's a machlokes. So Rabbi Lezer says, okay, that's all we know. Now Ula, the famous Amora, is going to come and he's going to help us understand the machlokes between Rabbi Lezer and the Chachamim. Omar Ula. Comes Ula and Omar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. Ula says the name of Yeshua ben Levi. Machlokes me osher la'ani. The machlokes here is as follows. A oshir, a wealthy person, came along, didn't own the field. A wealthy person came along and said, wow, there's payah here. I know that my friend Reuven is desperate. He has no food. I am going to be zeicha this for the ani, the ashir, the wealthy guy who's not a landowner. He gives his tzedakah too. But he sees, wow, there's a field here with payah. I'm the first to see it. I am designating this for so-and-so ani, right? That's the situation. And Rabbi Lezer says, it's okay. Why is it okay? Listen to this, very, very intriguing. Sovar, the wealthy guy, thinks as follows. Migo, I have a migo. We know what a migo is, right? I have a migo. The boy mafche nechose. I can forego my wealth. If I forego my wealth and I say I no longer have any money in the world, v'hava ani, he becomes an ani. Okay, I'm now an ani, says the usher. V'chazele, and I own it. Hashtanami chazele. Now I can own it for somebody else. Umiga de zochel nafshei zochenami lechavrei. And since he can own it for himself, now he can own it for somebody else. So Rabbi Lezer is saying it's a two-step process, but it's okay. An usher can, Migo, he could have said, he didn't. He could have said, I renounce my wealth. Now I'm an ani. Am I entitled to payah? Of course I'm entitled to payah. I'm an ani. So because he can renounce his wealth and be entitled to payah, that's amigo. Now he can say, and since I can take that, step one, step two, since I can take it for myself, I can take it for my chaver.
But that would negate it fitting into our fact pattern with the animal and the rider who finds it, right? Because it's not similar. In other words,
so Chaim, let's put aside our case because we have to go through this and then get to the punchline. So okay, so let's just talk about the Gemara and Peah. The Gemara and Peah, the Mishnah and Peah says, Rabbi Eliezer says, of course it's okay because there's a double migo. The first migo is I renounce my wealth. Now I'm a poor person. I'm entitled to it. And second migo, now that I'm entitled to it, now that I'm entitled to it, I can give it to my friend because he holds that what? That you can give it to your friend. So according to Rabbi Eliezer, two-step process, and you're allowed to do it. Go ahead, Menashe.
So he drives up in his new Mercedes to go pick up the payah for his friend. Oh, I'm giving away my wealth. He puts the stuff in his trunk and drives away. And then, well, I mean, in theory,
it's a legal theory. It's a legal theory.
Could do it.
Which we're testing now. And Rabbi Eliezer says that the theory holds water. You can, in theory, you can do this. You can renounce. You don't have to renounce. But what is amigo? We believe you to do something because you could have done something else.
So I own the field, but I could renounce the field. Now I can come back in and take payah now from my own field. Because Scott, I got amigo, right?
Scott, that's exactly what the Rishonim say is the kasha on Rashi. You just hit it. The kasha on Rashi is, why do you, Rashi, say that the owner of the field can't give payah? Of course he can give payah. He can renounce the field.
Right.
And if he renounces the field, he's an ani. That's exactly what the Rosh and the other Rishonim ask on Rashi. Rashi, how can you say that you can't take your own? You can take your own on amigo. Now we can talk about it because we now know that there is a double migo. I didn't do it before because I had to introduce the concept of a double migo. So according to Rabbi Eliezer, according to the Rishonim say, according to Rabbi Eliezer, of course you can take your own field because you're renouncing. So that's a machlekes Rishonim. Again, I don't want to make it too complicated, but the question is, when did you renounce? And now the question becomes, did you renounce before you harvested the product or after? That becomes an important question because if you harvested it after, then you were the owner in the harvest. And when are you chayiv payah? That's now the kasha, when you chayiv payah. If you chayiv payah the minute you harvest, then you've already owned it when you harvest. You can't undo what you already did. It's a complicated machlekes b'shonim, but you've now hit on the question of whether or not, as let's call it a chas v'shalom absurd, but as hard as it is to understand this theory, it is a theory that has halachic roots to it.
Halach l'maisa.
Yeah.
I have a very pedestrian view of all of this, and that is that the whole point of this is equitable distribution of proceeds, okay, to the community. So I'm assuming that there's a Gabbai Tzedak who's overseeing all of this rather than leaving it up to individual landowners. Maybe I'm wrong. So then he says, okay, here's how we're going to do this. We're going to have a kuppah, and then it's going to go to everybody equitably, and we'll designate it instead of leaving it in the hands of somebody who's going to fump around like this. And so there's a two-step thing where you're getting back to where you should have been originally.
Yeah, but in the case of some of these things, Leket and Peah, they are literally things left on the field, either sections uncut on the field or the parts that are dropped and left where they fell. And because of that, it's not the way we think of now with tzedakah, where everybody brings their tzedakah to a central place that then distributes it.
So Rick, to your point, yes, we very much believe in social justice, that there should be not a redistribution of wealth, but an equitable distribution of wealth. So Menashe, you're right that let's say there's two forms of wealth. one form of wealth where someone comes to the Gabe Tzedakah and says, you control this, I'm giving you $100, please give this. And we know that matlas b'seiser, that right, he should give it quietly so that the Gabe Tzedakah, without announcing that it belongs to so-and-so, can give the money away. That's one form of tzedakah. The other form of tzedakah is payah. Payah, you can't hide the fact that it's my property and I'm giving it away. I don't want the credit, but the halacha says that you have to give your payah. You can't shy away from that. That's not something that the Gabe Tzedakah can distribute. The Gabe Tzedakah can't come, again, now, this is the shaila here. Perfect example, Rick, you hit it. The Gabe Tzedakah is a wealthy guy, and he comes to the field, my field, and it says, you know what? Tuvia's field, I'm giving the payah to Menashe. Okay? The Gabe Tzedakah is the usher in our case. The usher comes along and says, I'm giving Tuvia's field to Menashe. Rabbi Lezer says, sure you can do it, because you, the Gabe Tzedakah, can become an ani. And if you become an ani and you can take it for yourself, you can take it for me. That's Rabbi Lezer. Let's just look at Rabbanan. And by the way, the halacha is like the Rabbanan, just to assuage our concerns, halacha karabim. But what do the Chachamim say? The Chachamim omrim, the Rabbanan savrei, chad migo omrinon, trei migo lo omrinon. So in the context of this discussion, the Rabbanan say, what are you talking about? There's no such thing as two migos. You can't pile one migo on another and say, if I were a rich man, now I'm a poor man. You can't do that. You can only do one migo. So a rich person cannot designate for somebody else. It has to be only someone who is a poor person. And if he is a poor person, then zochel nafshei, zochel namilachavrei. So on this is a machlokes. Now there's a machlokes in our Mishnah. Now we understand where Rabbi Lezer says zochelo, that if a person says, I want this corner to belong to Menashe, then Rabbi Lezer says, of course you can do that. Chacham says, of course you can't do that. Are you an ani? You're not an ani. You can't go around, you Gabe Tzedakah, and say, this corner goes to Menashe, this corner goes to Tuvia, this corner goes to Jay. You can't do that. It has to be the person who is himself an ani who will do it, because zachel and afshei, zachel lechavrei. One-step process, not two steps. So this is now the intricate machlokes between Rabbi Lezer and the Chachamim on what Ula says is it's based on the question of whether or not two migos are allowed in order to move property from here to here with two migos or only with one migo. That's the machlokes.
Or are ever two migos allowed? You know, piling two of these haba.
That's the question.
Right.
Absolutely. Right. So that's the fundamental question. Do we allow two migos, one migo which triggers another migo, and the second migo is what actually does the event? That's absolutely the question. So, and at the same time, we asked Scott, we asked a difficult question on Rashi. How can Rashi say that the pasuk tells us that a person who owns a field can't be an ani? Of course he can be an ani. He renounces his field. And the Rush asked that question, not you or I. The Rush asked that question on Rashi. Rashi, how can you say that? There is a way that a person who owns a field can be a shaliach to another ani. Okay, now let's look at Rashi. May osher la'ani. Okay, we did the first Rashi. May osher la'ani. She'osher shalikta l'terach ha'ani. And Rick, in your example, it's the Gabe Tzedakah who's going around and looking at all the fields and says, this field I'm going to give to Menashe, and this corner I'm going to give to Chaim, this corner I'm going to give to Scott. So the Gabe Tzedakah is doing his job. He's designating who gets what. Wait a minute, not so fast. Migo de zochel and afshei. The iboy have a zochel and afshei. This Gabai could be zoiche himself im higbi al atzmo. Why? Because he can renounce everything that he owns, and this gabe can now become an ani, right? Chad migo mi oni la ani. Rabbanan say only chad migo, from an ani to an ani, but not to get to an ani from someone who is an ashir and is renouncing. Okay, that's the fundamental machlokes between Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim. So, okay, so now, again, it takes a while for us to lay the groundwork. So it'll be easier next week, Fitz Hashem, when we pick up. But so let's go to the conclusion of this right now. According to Rabbanan, Trey Migalo Omrina, Ani Lani, Divra Hakol, Zachalo, the Miga, the Zachalo, Zachalo, Mechabrei. So that's Ula's position. We now know Ula's position. So let's at least, this has nothing to do with our Mishnah. We said a Mishnah, then we went off into Peah. So let's at least, before the end of today, bring it back to our Mishnah, like Chaim wanted to do. Amalei Rab Nachman LaUla. So comes Rab Nachman, and he says to Ula, wait a minute, Ula, not so fast. V'lema mar me'ani la'ani machlekes. Why do you have to say that the machlekes is Asher la'ani? That the Rabbi Eliezer says yes, and Rabbanan say no. No, let's say the machlekes is me'ani la'ani. What does it mean me'ani la'ani? That, in other words, can you even have an ani who can be zeicher for another ani? The Rabbi Eliezer says yes, and the Chachamim say one ani cannot be zeicher for another ani. Now, does that sound like our Mishnah? It's sounding a lot more like our case, where the discussion is, can one person do for another person? Rabbi Eliezer says, of course he can do for another person. He can be zeicher for himself, zochel l'nafshei, zochel l'nami l'chavrei. And the Rabbanan take the position, no, that you can't be zeicher for someone else. You can only be zeicher for yourself, but not for someone else. And the underlying reason is why you can't be zeicher is what we've been saying all along. Because if you're zeicher for someone else, you're excluding the rest of the world. You're taking away from everybody else, and that's not appropriate. So that takes the machlokes into a whole different level, says Rab Nachman. Why do we have to say Ula, that the machlokes is everybody agrees? According to Ula, everybody agrees that you can take for somebody else. The question is, how many layers can you go? Only one layer, or 2 layers? But everybody says you can do that. So Rab Nachman says, no, I don't buy that. I think the fundamental machlokes is, can you even do it for your friend? Forget about double amigos. Can you pick up something for your friend? Rabbanan saying, no, you can't. Therefore, an ani can't pick up for another ani. Rabbi Eliezer says, sure you can. You can pick up for your friend. That's allowed. Zochel l'nafshei, zochel l'chavrei. It's a beferish. I mean, everybody agrees to that according to Rabbi Eliezer. So that's the machlokes. Now, if you say that's the machlokes, so now let's talk about our Mishnah. The Ha Metzia, this Metzia in our Mishnah, right? There's a Metzia. It's a hefker Metzia on the ground. Hakol oniyim etzlo. So to speak, everybody is an oni. Everybody, we're not using the term ani in a literal sense. Everybody is an ani when it comes to this Metzia. It's hefker. Everybody can get it. The term of ani here is loosely defined as someone who doesn't necessarily have a right to this, but wants it. So I'm an ani, you're an ani. We're all an ani to this diamond lying on the ground, right? Utanan, and we learned in a Mishnah, this is now our Mishnah. Someone is riding on a behema, and he sees the Metzia of Amal Chavera Tanoni, Natla, he gives it to him. Fine. And I'm sorry, Natla. He picks it up. He picks it up, and what does he do when he picks it up? Makes a kinyan, makes a hagbah. And immediately upon making the hagbah, I am zocha ba. Now, if you take the position that once he picks it up, before he says anything, he immediately is zocha to the rider, to the other person, because zacha la'adam shelo b'fanav, then wait a minute. Then why should he be zocha to it? It should belong to the other guy. The fact that he says ani zechisi ba zocha ba seems to indicate that the minute he picks it up, it doesn't belong to the other guy. It does not belong to the rider. It belongs to him. Zocha ba, it's his. So this Mishnah now is going to give us a definitive answer to the machlokes. We think, this is half a minute, we think that this Mishnah is going to give us a definitive answer to the machlokes between Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Chachamim. Why? If you say the machlokes is me'ani la'ani, like Rav Nachman wants to point out, then top of Yudam and Aleph, Masnisin Mani Rabbanani. Then our Mishnah comes out according to the Rabbanan. Why does it come out according to the Rabbanan? Because he says, Ani zochisi. What do the Rabbanan say? Rabbanan say that you cannot be zoicher for somebody else. You cannot be zoicher for somebody else. Therefore, I understand, Ani zochisi. The guy says, I am zoicher for myself because I can't be zoicher for you. I cannot be zoicher for you according to the Rabbanan. Because according to the Rabbanan, you can't be zoicher l'nafshei for somebody else. Therefore, it makes sense. This Mishnah now makes sense when it says ani zechisi ba, because there was never a havamina that he could be zoicher for the other guy. But if you say that the machlokes is from Asher to Ani, 2 migos, 1 migo, but Ani to Ani, everybody says he's zocha homani. Who does this Mishnah come out to? Lo Rabbanan, below Rabbi Eliezer. Then this Mishnah doesn't come out to either Rabbanan or Rabbi Eliezer, because Rabbi Eliezer and the Rabbanan, if you're going to say that the machlokes is ani la'ani, then according to the Rabbanan, you would be able to transfer it because of a migo, and according to Rabbi Eliezer, you'd be able to transfer it because you're allowed a double migo. So think about it. If the machlokes is only in ani la'ani, then I understand the two sides, because ani la'ani, the Rabbanan say you can't transfer it. Rabbi Eliezer says you can, and our Mishnah says you can't transfer it. You cannot transfer it because we're saying that the minute he picks it up and makes a hagbah, it's his. It's zochaba. He's right away zocha to it, and he can't give it to the other guy. Now we can learn pshat that is according to the Rabbanan, who say you can't give it to the other guy. But if the whole machlokes is in Asher to Ani, but in Ani to Ani, the Rabbanan would agree that you can transfer. Remember, that was the position of the first of Ula. Then the Mishnah doesn't come out not like the Rabbanan and not like Rabbi Eliezer. Why? Because Rabbanan says you can transfer migo once, and Rabbi Eliezer says you can transfer migo twice. But at least you can transfer. And we're saying in our Mishnah you can't. So our Mishnah doesn't come out not to the Rabbanan and not to Rabbi Eliezer. So again, we have to think about this a minute, but he's now transferring the machlokes in Peah to our Mishnah, and is saying that depending on how you view the Rabbanan, it either makes sense or doesn't make sense. Rabbi Eliezer will always hold that you can transfer from one to the other. The only question is, in the Rabbanan, can you or can you not? So Rav Nachman wants to say that you have to say that Rabbanan says you can't. And therefore, our Mishnah comes out like that, Rabbanan, because our Mishnah also says you can't, you cannot. How does it say you cannot? Because it says, Ani zechisi ba zacha ba. Why is he zacha? The minute he picked it up for the other guy. No, You can't pick it up for the other guy. It's not permitted. Therefore, the minute he picked it up, he says, Zachabah, it's his, has to be his. Who is that according to? That's according to the Rabbanan, who say that you cannot pick it up for somebody else. Then there is it's comparable. That Mishnah in Peah, our Mishnah here. But if you're going to say that the Rabbanan agree that with one migo you can, right? The first machlokes, then how does it come out to our Mishnah? Our Mishnah says you can't, and everybody says you can. Rabbanan says with one migo, Rabbi Eliezer says with two migos, but at least you can, and our Mishnah says you cannot. Therefore, who is the Manda Amr of our Mishnah? So that's the kasha of Nachman is asking on Ula. Ula, according to you, it doesn't hold water because you can't make the argument that the machlokes is by the usher and the ani. It has to be by the ani and the ani, and then it makes sense that the Rabbanan say ani to ani, you also cannot transfer. So that's now the thinking of the Gemara. It's a little bit cloudy here, but let's think about this. Mitchum will review quickly next week, but just understand that we went through this whole thing in the Mishnah and Peah to give us the background to understand what the discussion is between Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim. Now, to those who are bottom line, like who Rick asked before, the halacha happens to be like the Chachamim, right? Because we don't say migo to on migo you can do, but in the discussion of the Gemara, certainly Rabbi Eliezer is a prominent enough Tana to say, wait a minute, migo to migo, of course migo to migo works because you can renounce, but comes Rav Nachman and says, Ula, you built something on a very shaky foundation because according to you, there's no one, not Rabbanan, not Rabbi Eliezer, who's the Manda Omer of our Mishnah. In other words, we always want to have symmetry. In other words, we want to be able to say that there's compatibility between the Mishnah in Peah, to the Mishnah in Bava Metzia, to the Mishnah in Gittin. In other words, we don't want one result here, a second result here, a third result here. No. Again, Teku, we always say when Mashiach comes, he'll reconcile everything. But to the best of our ability, the Gemara, the whole point of the Gemara is to understand one Mishnah, a Gemara, vis-a-vis the Mishnah and Gemara someone else, because these are the same Tanoim and Amoraim who are learning. It isn't one set of Tanoim who learn Gittin, another set of Tanoim who learn Brachas, another set who learn Bava Metzia. No. They all learned all of this at the same time, so therefore their positions have to be compatible. Rabbanan can't say, oh, I agree, it's blue here, but there it's green. No, if it's blue, it has to be blue. So that's the underlying principle here, is that you can't just bounce around. So now we understand that in order to say that there is comparability between the Mishnah and Peah and our Mishnah, we have to, Rav Nachman says, you have to say that the machlokes is ani to ani, not osher to ani. Okay, I hope it's confusing enough, but that really is how we come out, but we're not finished. I mean, there still is plenty to discuss and other things that will come up that David and others have talked about earlier, but at least from our concept right now, Rav Nachman has a good kasha on Ula, and he says our Mishnah has to be speaking about ani to, the Mishnah and Peah has to be speaking about ani to ani, and then it comes out that our Mishnah comes out according to the Rabbanan, not according to Rabbi Eliezer.
Shkoyach.
All right?
Shkoyach, Rabbi.
Confusing enough. So Mitzvah we'll go for it from here. All right.
Thank you.
Have a good week, everybody.
You have a week to figure it out again.
Oh, yeah.
The week helps.
So much.
Yeah.